Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a classic review, classic review of Talking Heads, Remain in Light, 1980 album. Legendary new wave and post-punk outfit Talking Heads, David Byrne, Tina Weymouth, Chris France, Terry Harrison, formed in 1975, and they were one of many great bands to play at the legendary New York music club CBGB's, which was formerly the stomping grounds of many greats: Television, Richard Hell, the Ramones, Patti Smith, Sonic Youth. The list is endless. The place was literally a petri dish for some of the most essential alternative music ever recorded. Now, in their early years, Talking Heads' sound was a bit of a crossover, kind of a bridge between two worlds. The band, while their music was alternative and had the eccentricities and the risk-taking qualities of punk music, they were very in touch with contemporary pop and dance music as well, borrowing grooves from the worlds of disco and funk and applying them to some really strange ideas. Eccentric vocals and lyrics from David Byrne, really herky and jerky bass and guitars. Give a listen to the iconic single Psycho Killer if you're kind of looking for an example. Over time, the band's music would only get more ambitious. Bigger instrumentation, awesome ballads like the song Heaven, an eyebrow-raising cover of Take Me to the River, incorporating elements of African music, especially into the rhythm section of their music. The band's rhythms became smoother, more danceable, in a way, more accessible, but still simultaneously David Byrne's vocal performances would also become wilder. And this would all come to a head on the band's 1980 record, Remain in Light, their most popular studio album, which also contained their most significant hit song, Once in a Lifetime. And with Brian Eno on production of Roxy Music fame, he's also had some great solo records, ambient works. This album would not be assembled in the same way that previous Talking Heads records were. The songs on this album are essentially a series of licks and snippets and loops recorded from the band itself and then assembled into these longer compositions. And the instrumentals are masterfully assembled as the grooves on this thing really hold water. We're talking about a lot of instrumental layers on this thing, considering that many of them are samples, that many of them are just chunks of sounds, guitars, bass, vocals and background vocals, horns, polyrhythms and hand percussion, synths and various sound effects and weird glitchy edits. None of this probably sounds all that radical in an age of LCD sound system, but when you consider this album came out in 1980 in a musical landscape of Michael Jackson, Olivia Newton-John, Styx, Air Supply, hardcore punk, Blondie, Queen, Billy Joel, and straightforward synth pop, this thing's pretty progressive. The grooves on this thing, as I said, they're flawless, they're hypnotic, they're fluid throughout the entire record, and the album essentially works in two halves. It kicks off with a really explosive, visceral start, and then eventually into something way more abstract and spacey around Houses in Motion. The song Born Under Punches starts the entire record. It's a song that is as funky as it is unsettling. The track features these popped, pronounced bass lines, very jerky guitars. It's clunky, it's cluttered, but it's got a beat to it. A really good beat, too. I also like the little diddling, eerie, strange guitars that sort of find themselves looping back into the track again and again and again. And David Byrne's lyrics here seem like he's talking about government oppression and pressure to sort of lead a certain life or give in to what the system wants you to do, which is not a new lyrical theme for him, but it seems like he's approaching it in a more abstract way with these really pronounced proclamations. I'm a tumbler! And then chilling those out with these very stone-faced refrains as he's singing, all I want is to breathe. There's also a freaky, twisted guitar solo on this thing that sounds like it was mangled in a tape machine or something. I love the studio trickery that goes into this record. There's so much detail in these linear, hypnotic songs. And there's also a really cool refrain in the second half that I like a lot. I sort of wonder if lyrically it's kind of a play on the idea that the beat goes on, but David Byrne and company are singing instead, the heat goes on, and the heat goes on, and the heat goes on. The songs Cross-Eyed and Painless and The Great Curve really turn the heat up, intensify the record. They deliver some of the tightest, speediest beats. The dense layers of instrumentation on this thing are awesome. The vocals, the guitars, the polyrhythms, the bass, the keys, and lyrically, once again, David Byrne sort of goes neurotic, much in the way that he was on Psycho Killer and many other tracks too, as he obsesses over lines and shapes and facts. Underneath David Byrne's emotional chaos, each instrument is sort of just like a little tiny sliver of sound and melody, sort of just a very small embellishment that altogether creates this larger tapestry. I just love the layers on this record. I love how the assembly of these sounds comes together, especially as the band works in these refrains, these vocal refrains that are all thrown on top of each other. It's not odd to hear three different refrains being sung over one another at different speeds and paces. The Great Curve is an example of that, and lyrically this song is I think going into this idea of being anxious over not completely understanding the world, and this is set against imagery of a woman dancing, and this woman is being controlled, maybe remote controlled. It seems like those themes of government control or system control are coming back that were introduced at the intro track. And with the song Once in a Lifetime, we have a career-defining groove on this thing. I mean, it's so good. Boom, boom, boom. And this bass line is just plunged into a sea of just swirling, sparkling, shimmering arpeggios. And the band maintains the beat as they switch from this chorus that is super sweet, soulful, inspiring, almost heavenly, and then these very pronounced animated spoken word vocals. The comparison has been made before that David Byrne sounds a lot like a preacher on this track, and I have to agree. It's almost as if he's, telling the crowd something, preaching something, but that only kind of comes through in the tone of his voice. I feel like lyrically this song is a little too abstract and is really just supposed to confuse and emotionally stir the listener and kind of reflect on the speed of life, and how water, for example, is brought up as a theme in this track, is kind of like the current pushing you onto the next stage of life and you can't really control it. The album goes dark and introspective on Houses in Motion. David Byrne's vocals turn very soft, very quiet, spoken word, and then he's switching that off with his trademark eccentric yelpy vocal delivery on the chorus. But what really steals the show for me is the really gummy bass line, the awesome guitar licks on this track, and what sounds like horns just popping up so sporadically in the mix that they're unpredictable, almost like glitchy. Just really interesting sound for this record and for anybody, really. And the record gets even more cerebral on the song Seen and Not Seen. The instrumental is enveloping, it's watery, it's psychedelic, it's vast. And the lyrics sound like they're dealing in vanity with a man who is thinking about his facial structure and how he prefers these particular facial structures that he sees on celebrities, on magazines, and so on and so forth. So he's thinking that if he imagines the facial structure that he wants to have in the forefront or in the back burner of his mind, that he'll eventually have that face. It's strange, to say the least, but that's sort of the odd feelings that a Talking Head record could bring up. And then there's Listening Wind, and it's kind of interesting to see the trajectory of this record. I love the flow of this album, comparing this track to the first track here. We've gone from something that is really complex, progressive, noisy, clunky, dense, to something much more sparse and primordial. This song here, in comparison with the earlier portion of the record, is like a dream state. The track is relaxing, it kind of puts me into a lull, but it's haunting too. And what's even more haunting is the closer here, the Overload, which is super dreary and dystopian. The vibe of the song is almost gothic in a way, which makes the track stand out like a sore thumb. And I guess it's just another moment where the album's flow has to be sort of admired, because it started off with so much fire, and now as it's finishing, it's in an incredibly dark place. It's not exactly leaving you on a happy ending here, but still, I love this album. It's a great record. It's a progressive record. It's a forward-thinking album, but yet, and maybe this is only because we have hindsight when we're listening to this record. It's still so catchy, it's still so easy to listen to, it's still so visceral, it's still so danceable. And even the tracks that don't really rely that heavily on a groove in the latter half are engaging, at least on a mental level. This thing is just a bold, eccentric, out there statement. And I will probably continue to love it and admire it for that for years to come. And I can only hope that you're doing that with me with this review. I think we're going to leave it at that. Classic. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? I would hope so. Classic review, man. I would hope so. And if you have, did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You the best, you the best. What should I review next? Have a good day. That's what I say. Arms are looking sharp. Sorry guys. Sorry. Don't mean to flex on you. Forever.